Hello Orchid friends, how are you? Welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time watching my video, my channel is all about orchids. From what orchids I have, how I grow them, my thoughts on certain orchid topics, to what orchids in my collection are blooming, etc. So if you want to follow along my orchid hobby adventure, please consider subscribing to my channel and turn on the notification. Today in this video, we're going to look at my Phalaenopsis Purple Martin. This is one of my favorite orchids. When I first began my orchid hobby journey, Purple Martin and Tetraspis C1 were the two orchids that fascinated me so much that I really wanted to get a hold of these orchids, and eventually I was able to purchase them, but I waited for quite some time. So for this orchid back in 2019, I made two videos. The first video was capturing how it bloomed up until end of May and then end of August. And then this thing happened. It started to drop a few leaves, or I should say it started to yellow a couple leaves and then eventually drop all three of them. We can talk about this a little bit, but I can tell you, thankfully, it was not that big of a problem. As you can see, it continued to elongate its flower spike and continue to produce buds, just like normal. So, in terms of yellow leaves, there are a couple of things that I will consider before I determine whether an orchid really is in need of some help. So in this case, yes, it's 3 leaves that were yellowing. Typically, I would tell people 1 leaf, 2 leaves are regular signs of an orchid aging, shedding old leaves. 3, it can be alarming, but you do have to also look at the speed of these leaves getting yellow. So for this particular orchid, it took these yellow leaves about 2.5-3 weeks to become yellow, completely yellow, gradually, and then eventually drop their leaves. So it was relatively slow compared to yellowing leaves that was caused by, say, root rot. Typically, the speed of that yellowing is much faster. Sometimes within a couple of days, like 2-3 days, a leaf can just drop like that. And often, because the speed is so fast that the entire leaf only has 1/3 that's yellowed, and the other 2/3 of the leaf may still be somewhat green. So I was kind of worried, but not really, because I did take it out of the outer blue cup, the decorative cup, because I wanted to see if there's anything obvious that I could see from the roots that was maybe rotting, but there was nothing, right? And because it was already approaching my winter time, so I was already reducing the amount of water that I was giving this orchid, right? So from about 1/4 cup to 1/8 of a cup. So it was, the wet dry cycle completes within a week, and I was able to observe the entire root system, or from the outside, without taking it out of the cup, without taking the orchid out. I was able to look at the roots, and they were looking just fine. So I was not worried after looking at the roots. But I think the biggest sign, the okay sign for me about this orchid, was the spike continued to elongate and continue to produce buds. I know some orchids, they bloom themselves to death even though they're stressed. But this one, it just didn't seem like it was stressed, because the flowers looked good, the leaves were good. Yes, it lost 3 leaves, but they were the bottom ones. If the yellow leaves were the ones in the middle, then I would say this orchid probably had something really terribly wrong inside the media. But thankfully, it continued to bloom, and now we are at end of October 2019, and it was still looking strong, and the buds were still developing to eventually bloom out. So with all that said, if you're new to this orchid hobby, a couple things you need to know about yellowing leaves. You do have to look at how many and whether there are older leaves, meaning at the bottom or they're in the middle, and then also how quickly are these leaves turning yellow. If it's the bottom one or two, probably not as alarming, and if it's also a very slow speed, taking 2 weeks to yellow or 3, I have orchids that yellow their leaves so gradually that it took like 2 months to completely yellow a leaf, then that's completely normal. So these are the kind of things that you need to take into account before you think that an orchid is somehow is stressed out, that you need to maybe take it out of the pot just to see if there's anything wrong within the media, meaning its root system having any kind of rot issue. Now earlier I said this orchid is a classic, and the reason I say that is because this orchid has, I believe, Violacea in its parentage, the Cerulean type Violacea, or maybe Violacea indigo. So in the orchid world, there is no true blue color for orchids. So anything that's close or closer to blue, like cerulean, dark purple, or indigo color, then it's rarer to find, and they can be a little bit more expensive than regular orchid. So this orchid, everybody loves it for its color, plus fragrance, and I think that comes from Violacea. And then, because this orchid has a species, Violacea, in its parentage, so it actually has sequential blooming capability. So when we're talking about a sequential bloomer, the number one thing you have to know is do not cut the flower spike when it's green, because it may continue to elongate, grow longer, and grow more buds to give you more flowers. So that's one thing I really want you to know if you are new to this orchid hobby. Another thing about orchid is even if they're not sequential bloomer, as long as the spikes are green, do not cut them, because they may produce secondary spikes or give you keikis on the spikes. Keikis essentially are orchid babies. Now this is more of a bonus footage for this video, and some of these pictures I have already shared with you last year when I was talking about the orchid on the left, but I still include these photos here in case some of you missed that video, so you can still get to see some of the the footage or video. So the reason I put them side by side was because, well, they were in bloom at the same time. And the one on the right, the miniatures, if I remember correctly, it's a cross between Bellina and Equestras, and those two are Cerulean type. So they're all kind of in the same color family, and they were in bloom at the same time. They both all have purple lips or dark blue lips. So I thought we'll put them together to compare side by side, so you get to see how they compare against each other and how they contrast. Obviously, the miniatures is a lot more fragrant, because Purple Martin's fragrance is kind of faint. You do have to get pretty close to it in order to smell it, unless you're really smelling at it like around between 11 and 1 o'clock. Then you might be able to detect it easily. Otherwise, miniatures' fragrance definitely is a lot stronger, and that actually, comes from the Bellina, I believe. But all in all, I think my Purple Martin for 2019 really, really did so well. It exceeded my expectation. So the answer is this orchid bloomed for 8 months. It opened its first flower on May 1st, and it dropped its last flower at the very end of December 2019. This is all I have for you today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you would like to get more orchid related videos from my channel, please subscribe and turn on the notification. I want to wish you happy growing, and I will talk to you in my next video. Ciao!